get started with our teacher panel. As you can see on the screen, there's a QR code to Athena. Athena is a free resources for teachers and educators to exchange information. This is where a lot of our African diaspora content is. So here we have some of our teachers. They provide sample lesson plans, sample units, sample assignments. So Athena is the main resource for you all to engage with the African diaspora content and how to incorporate it in AP Seminar. And the founder is here somewhere, Peter Neeson. Peter, stand up so everyone can see you. Peter, so if you have any questions about Athena, the platform, the resource, certainly reach out to Peter. He's the brains behind it all. And with that being said, off to our teacher panel.
Good morning. Are you there? Good morning. How did everyone sleep last night? Excellent. I'm thrilled to be here. My name is Mario Herrera. I teach at Midtown High School in Atlanta, Georgia, and I get to ask some questions of these amazing teachers up here to kind of give you an insight, a little bit of what it looks like and feels like from a teacher perspective to focus on the African diaspora curriculum, to offer ideas about how classrooms work, and a little bit about like the politics of it, because let's be honest, this is a fantastic opportunity, and it's also a bizarre political climate. This is the world that we live in, and so teachers have to navigate that in their classrooms, and they do that in various ways, and all of these teachers have found success. So I think to start off, I'm going to have you all introduce yourselves and a little bit about where you teach and just about you. Ruki, you want to start off?
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Ruki Yatou Khan, and I teach at the Senegalese American Bilingual School in Dakar, Senegal, which is in West Africa. And it's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Michelle Rich. I teach at Denver East High School in Denver, Colorado, and I've been there for the last 6 years.
Good morning. I'm Shyla Scott. I teach at Edison High School in North Philadelphia.
And I'm Kerry Hurt. I teach at Grissom High School in Huntsville, Alabama, and I was one of the original pilot teachers and have worked with Rachel on curriculum development. So I look forward to sharing what has been a great ride for me. Thank you.
Don't you love it when the segue presents itself? So Kerry, let's start with you because you were one of the pilot schools, and we talked kind of over the years. When you were going to introduce this curriculum to your students and to your school, what were your initial thoughts? What did you think was going to go well? Did you have any reservations? What were your thoughts going into that first year of teaching the curriculum?
Okay, so I did the original pilot for seminar in 2015, and so I had 2 years of experience with seminar before this was presented. My original theme that I taught, I thought I was a genius and decided to teach immigration as a theme. My kids hated it. It was timely, it was topical, there were all these resources, and they hated it. They wanted to do animal migration, or they wanted to do historic migration, but nobody wanted to do immigration. So when Cassie and Dr. Nash and Rushi presented this, just as a possibility, as a thought, it was light bulb clicked on. It is such an easy thing to incorporate because, as Rachel said, it's so broad and covers everything. I'm presenting in a mostly white school district. We're about a 70-20-10 district, but majority white. Obviously, I'm the old white guy in the room. So I do view the diaspora content almost as I think of it as responsible tourism. I'm not in it, but I respect it and I appreciate it, and it has been undertaught and underserved. And this has given me the opportunity to take some of our best, highest achieving students and hand it to them, and I've watched them hand it to their classmates and others and carry on with it, some even on their college work, and some are now in graduate school. So, all right, that's enough time for me. That's my background on how I got here and why, like I say, it's a no-brainer. As a theme for seminar, especially those of you who are new to seminar, does give you an in into almost any interest area that students can think of. You can relate to diaspora content.
Thank you, Carrie. So, Shyla, when you decided to offer the curriculum at your school, how did you think your students were going to initially react? And is that actually what happened?
So that's a good question. In Philadelphia, African American history is a graduation requirement. So in that regard, I knew my students had the content. I wasn't necessarily worried about that, or at least they had some level of it. I wasn't going to have to build content from the jump. What my biggest difficulty was the skills that AP Seminar offers. Teaching in an urban setting at a neighborhood school, public school, that doesn't test very well. I was very nervous about how College Board tests. The year prior to my course, only 2 students passed in any AP course at my school. When I taught AP Seminar, I had 7 kids pass. So it was a wild, and I just got to see how testing them in different ways outside of multiple choice, asking them to talk about things, discuss things, write things, was such a beautiful way for my students to showcase their intelligence. And it was just such a rewarding part of the class, and that we got to kind of go further in depth in African American history beyond what they already had, and kind of get to be these scholars on it and present their own perspectives. So I would say the students were wary at first, but by the end of the course, a lot of the students were very appreciative of the skills that AP Seminar provided for them.
You bring up a good point because, in my opinion, AP Seminar is one of those few classes where you see where students start, and then you see that growth, and then when you add something like the curriculum, it manifests itself in such beautiful ways. Has that been your experience, Michelle? Like, how was it at the beginning, and how you thought it was going to be, and as it's progressed, what have you seen that maybe was unexpected?
Yeah, I think for my students in particular, having the research papers, their eyes get really big at the beginning of the year when I tell them they're going to write a couple 6 to 8 page papers, maybe 10, 12. But I think scaffolding and easing them into the process and saying that we're on this journey together and supporting, and they just kind of look at me and roll their eyes, and then about halfway through, they're like, okay, I can do this. And so I think that's been great seeing them from the beginning to the end, and that they're really proud of what they've accomplished on that submission date.
Great, thanks. All righty, so how did you approach introducing this Ruki to your students? The African Diaspora curriculum is going to, it seems to me, be a little different in how you approach it than maybe how others approach it. What did you find was the approach that made it work for students?
So I teach in West Africa, and most of my students are from Senegal, as well as from different countries in Africa. And about half of my students, if not even more, have lived and or were born abroad. So we have national diasporic communities from the UK, from France, from Italy, even from China. And so I thought that it would be extremely relevant and important to focus my AP Seminar course on the diaspora, with other topics that help them to think about issues historically, but also how they relate to current day world problems that we see. So it was really the pinnacle of the course. I couldn't see myself doing it any other way because of the context of where I am.
Thank you for that. And you bring up a kind of an interesting point as well. So I eavesdrop a lot. As teachers, we do that. That's how we know when students are planning, what they think they're planning, and how we can circumvent that. And so I was doing the same thing last night at that incredible event, and listening to teachers who were thinking about starting their curriculum, those that have tried it, are looking for different ideas. And it kind of made me realize my first year, and what I thought it was going to be as opposed to what it is now. So for everyone out there who is thinking about starting this or wants to expand upon what they're already doing, what do you wish you would have known going into that first year of teaching the African diaspora curriculum that would have really helped you out with that process. And anyone who wants to pop in first, feel free.
I guess I'll go. I think the biggest thing I wish I would have known is how to balance the AP seminar skills with the content of the diaspora. And so there's so much content that I worried that I wasn't maybe doing it justice because I'm like, oh my gosh, I came from an A-push background where you're like kind of tied to that CE. And so balancing, I think, the seminar expectations with the content. And then I just finally realized I think the content takes the priority. So kind of when in doubt, I want the kids to get this content because they're not going to get it anywhere else.
That's a good point. I know every year I have a student who will say during, actually when I show Nafisa's website, Slave Voyages, there will be a student that says, why am I just learning about this now? You know, it's shocking to them, so that's a really good point. Anyone else? What do you wish you would have known when you were starting off the curriculum?
Well, I'll say when I started with the African Diaspora curriculum, and I helped Rachel help develop some lessons with her guidance, and my minor contributions. But anyway, what I wish I had known was how students emotionally react to material. When we started, my lessons were history-based lessons, African influence, just trying to show the impact of the diaspora. But over the course of the last 5 years, we've changed, education's changed, seminar has changed, and I've watched my students develop into much more an emotional attachment for social justice movements and for seeing the diaspora in a different lens than how I originally envisioned it. So my lesson plans have had to evolve, and I'm trying to be creative and trying to think of things where I'm spurring them to think as opposed to preaching to them with the lesson I think they need to learn. And seminar has given me the capability to do that. And so I think I'm there now, but I'm still working on new lessons. So.
Great, thank you. Shyla, Ruby? Shyla, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I wish I knew going into it how much planning it would take. I would say that I definitely front-loaded the planning of it to make the rest of the course go smoothly. I think I would have prepared myself a little bit more for like the technical aspects of it, so like the citations, how to write an MLA format. Like these are a lot of things that my students were lacking at the start of the school year, so I wish that I front-loaded that a little bit more. It's really important to make sure your students know how to do citations, MLA format, how to assess the validity of a source and all those things. So I probably would have done a lot more of that because that was what they really struggled with.
Okay, great, thank you. What are your thoughts, Ruby?
I think I'll join my colleagues on a lot of what they said. But for me, what stands out the most is the adaptability and flexibility that is required with AP Seminar and including topics in African diaspora. Every year, my classes, their interests change, they evolve. How I started versus how I'm teaching it now also is a reflection of what my students' interests are. And sometimes as teachers, it can be uncomfortable to change your plan, but I think it's really important to be flexible and to adapt to the students that you have and what matters to them when you are covering this content as well.
You know, and it's something I think that all of us can kind of agree with, and we were just speaking to it. We always have something to learn. You know, if there's one thing that this has taught me is that I really don't know anything, and that I always have something to learn. And so actually going on that journey along with our classes can help enrich the experience even more when they see our process and the fact that we're learning as well. I think that can be a really fantastic part of the offering the curriculum. Okay. So because of kind of the global political whatever is happening, students are coming to the classroom with their own ideas. They're getting news from, as I call it, TikTok. They aren't necessarily looking at those sources. Recently on TikTok, I was mentioning this to you yesterday. The Montgomery Brawl is what all my students are talking about. And it's amazing how they honestly think it happened back in the 1870s, and it's a thing. So knowing where they're coming from, I think it is important. And that can be an obstacle. But then again, there's also those successes. So I'm going to totally put you on the spot. Think about for a moment like an obstacle that you weren't expecting. How did you deal with that? And then share a success. Because I think if we get caught up only in the negative, then that's what we see in our classrooms, right? We've learned that over the years. So an obstacle that maybe a student brought to it, maybe you had in the classroom, from your school district, from your community, and then, just how you overcame that, so, something positive that occurred as a result.
I can definitely speak to this because I did experience this with one of my male students. We were reading a source from a woman named Marie Renfro, who is a Black queer woman in San Francisco. And he really fought me on it. And he was like, well, I don't understand why I have to learn about this. I don't understand why I have to get this perspective. Like, I don't care about this stuff. It was a lot of that kind of response, which as a teacher, I've gotten that before, but never kind of in an AP honors kind of setting. And it was the first time that I was really challenged with that idea of like, why am I including this narrative? Or why are we talking about this narrative? And we got to have a whole discussion, which ended up, my students led the discussion, but we got to talk about of like, okay, well, just because you don't identify with this narrative does not mean it wasn't part of history. Doesn't mean it wasn't part of the African diaspora. And that is part of what I think is so beautiful about this course is that there are going to be unanswered questions or things that you maybe can't rationalize yet, that you need to study a little bit more to get that understanding. But it ended up, like, other students ended up addressing the student saying, like, well, we've been in school for almost 18 years and I've never learned about a Black lesbian before, or I've never heard that perspective before. But have I heard from, a male perspective? Absolutely. So it was one of those moments where it was really cool to kind of see this generation really step up and defend these voices that have been undertaught and underserved. And they recognize that. I mean, TikTok does do a good job of showing them other narratives that they had never, necessarily considered or had considered valid enough to be part of history. So, I mean, that would be one thing that I did run into, but really, because the nature of the class, it really resolved itself.
Wow, thank you for that. Anyone else want to chime in? I know it's quite the question. It's quite the question. The class, Ruki, you have something?
I can talk about a challenge and also a success.
Excellent.
So one of the challenges that I've had being on the continent and really focusing on topics that relate to the continent, it's been accessing a lot of scholarly work on and about Africa, or even written by Africans or people of African descent. And so that's a challenge that I'm just putting out there because it's real. And I'm in Francophone West Africa, so finding resources in English on Francophone West Africa, or even resources in French. There's just limited research out there on and about Africa that is made available to high school students. But I think my biggest success is really seeing the joy in learning that my students develop and how they use the skills that they have outside of the class. I think focusing on topics that relate to Africa and the diaspora has allowed my students to really be impactful outside of the classroom. They leave our school and go on to be leaders on their college campuses of Black and African student associations. They seek to do research opportunities abroad in different countries in Africa that they wouldn't have considered going to before if they hadn't really been exposed to these. So that's something that I'm just always so proud of.
Thank you so much for sharing that. So both of you mentioned something that maybe Perry, Michelle, anyone else would like to kind of jump in. Is there a magical resource for you? Is there a go-to where, and maybe it changes every year, but there's something about that particular resource that you have found just really important and pivotal and kind of like life-changing? And it doesn't have to be all that significant. I mean, let me throw this out there. So, have you all seen Barbie? Okay, hi Barbie. and the kids were talking about it in class. And one of the male students said, yeah, it was so cool how they made the unrealistic seem realistic. And another student asked, like what? And he said, well, like a black female president. Exactly, that's what they did. And then another student said, is it because of their race or their gender? And it got real quiet. And someone said, have you heard about this man? His first name's Barack. And they finally just started laughing, and he said, I guess I never had to think of it that way before. And all of a sudden, it was a simple movie scene that became something interesting in the classroom. So anything like that that you've used in the past that maybe might inspire some of these teachers out in the audience to utilize as well?
Well, I will share one of my favorite anecdotes. So, in the original slide that Rachel had up that had the different topics, one of those topics was African influence in China. That was a student of mine who's finishing at Harvard this year. But when she was a freshman, or rather when she was a junior in high school, and took seminar, and she was in my original group with African diaspora, was the year that Black Panther was released. And we came through, it was released, I want to say November of that year, but we're just before Christmas. But we're walking down the hall, we finished our African diaspora unit. I do my African diaspora unit as a model for the performance tasks in the second semester, so I do the whole thing in the first semester. We're walking down the hall, and there's a group of African American students who had been the night before as a group to see Black Panther, and one of them said, I'm so glad to finally see representation that Black people can do stuff. And she stopped and she said, wait, don't you know about Mensa Musa? And so she went into a mini lecture in the hall explaining that there were these great African civilizations, and and they were just rapt. They stopped and looked and followed her into the classroom, and she was sharing resources. And so she was spreading what I think of as this undertaught knowledge that needs to be known amongst students that she otherwise would not have really interacted with. And I had students coming back and asking. I had other students who they told who were coming back and asking. So it led interest in the course for future enrollment, but that was what I said. That's the raison d'etre, right? That's what we're doing, is to try and get the word out that this is there. And that was student-driven, student-led, and spontaneous, but based on something from popular culture.
Yeah, I would agree. I think starting the semester off looking at the history on the African continent, I usually start my course with kind of what is history in general terms, and silences and agency, and power and production. And so much of like the Eurocentric view, right, is that Africa didn't have this history or culture prior to colonization. So starting there, I think really opens light. I don't have a specific source, but I tend to start there prior to anything.
So everyone has kind of a foundation that doesn't
Yes.
have one. Excellent.
Yeah, one of the sources that I used that I really, really used was JSTOR.org. I agree that they don't have the best variety of perspectives, but that is one way I found it was really user-friendly. Students get a free account if they have a Gmail account, so JSTOR.org. It's very awesome for students to be able to do research and look at scholarly journals, interact with like abstracts and things like that. And JSTOR also is connected to EasyBib, which EasyBib is how you cite things or how you can cite things. So you just have to click on JSTOR to cite the article. So I would say that saved my students so much time of like citations and kind of that more specific work. So those were two sources that I use all the time.
Yeah, and I know school districts will sometimes connect with local universities and public libraries. College Board, students have access to EBSCO through the digital portfolio. Yeah, those databases, once they become unafraid of looking at a 20-page document, it can be a real game changer. Okay. So, think about, if you would please, how wonderful this curriculum is. And And I'd like you, if you would, to kind of maybe give us a word or a short phrase that you would say kind of encapsulates like your experience and your thoughts about offering this type of curriculum during the seminar. We'll start with Carrie.
I would just say it's eye-opening for my students and expands their horizons.
I would say it's empowering.
Oops.
I was going to say empowering as well. We're going to stick with empowering. I think that's the way to go.
That's what it is. That's what it is.
And mine is liberation.
Thank you all. Yeah, I think this curriculum it opens doors that maybe we didn't even realize existed, or that we didn't realize were locked, and we need to give students the key to open those doors. Thank you for your time and sharing your experiences. I know I learned a lot, and thanks for being here. It's great to work with you.